So let's shift over to the Western Conference. We got our Eastern Conference All-Star team in. Let's go to our Western Conference starters to begin with. Not going to be many surprises here, I'm guessing, Geoff. Starters we have in our backcourt, SGA and Luka Doncic. Starters we have in our front court, Nikola Jokic, LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard. Any specific player or person you want to talk about in our starting lineup for the Western Conference All-Star team?
I first, when we made this, I think the thing I was most excited about was to talk about Luka. I think we had a conversation about him about a month ago on here, and I just think he continues to be the most fascinating player in the NBA to me. And I wish I had chosen my words better. I still stand by the things that I said, and I still do believe, and I'd be happy to, for those who didn't get to listen to that episode, the basis of my opinion about Luka is that while he's an exceptionally talented individual player, as long as he plays the style that he does, the teams that he play on will be, the ceiling of the teams that he plays on will be capped relative to his skill or relative to players of his skill and impact. And I wish I had chosen my words better, because the NBA community, or at least NBA fan community and the content creation community, is so polarizing, and it's like you have to take the most extreme opinion and just stand by it to get to just try an engagement farm. And I feel like it came off that that's what I was trying to do, and it's not what I was trying to do at all. And it came off like I wasn't fully appreciating how awesome Luka is and how he's just this otherworldly talent who can do crazy things like score have a 70-point triple double and like just do all these amazing
on
things
90% true shooting.
Right. But the team he played wasn't a great defense, so it doesn't matter. Like, oh my God. I sent that night for, obviously nobody's privy to our text conversations. The discourse around Luka's dominance made me so mad that I basically just in our text sent XJ old Larry Bird clips so that I could just get mad about how fucking terrible the defense was back then and how nobody talks about it. But I digress. I just wish I had chosen my words better, because I want people to be open to what I'm saying without it seeming like I don't want to be one of those people who's like, oh, Luka can never win a championship. Like, no, I don't believe that Luka can never win a championship. When I say these things, I'm always speaking relative to the tier or the conversation that person's clearly in. And to me, Luka is very clearly in the MVP conversation. Like, he is very clearly one of the most valuable players in the league. And I think relative to his peers, relative to other players who are amongst the most valuable players in the league, Luka is kind of hamstrung by the fact that when he plays the style that he does, he elevates role players, but it's hard as another really, really good player to maintain their impact playing next to him, whether that's, a Kyrie Irving or a Kristaps Porzingis or a Jalen Brunson, or you bring in an external talent, like think about Devin Booker playing next to Luka. Think about there's so many names that you could put in, and it's like, okay, well, that's kind of a messy fit if you put them next to Luka. I think as long as he plays this way, I believe that it's going to be hard for him to see the topmost team success, and I still feel that way. But I want to make it clear that, man, is this guy just like an amazing, amazing talent. And I'm super open to being wrong, because like maybe he's just so overwhelmingly good, it doesn't matter. So that's where I'm at right now with him. And it's just been incredible to watch him recently. I wanted to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the clarification on your stance. I mean, I understood your stance, but I totally think it's helpful to reiterate some of that stuff. At least for me, how I think about Luka is that I think our disagreement, at least, is that I think that Luka is good enough individually that he doesn't need those guys, right? Like, he doesn't need to be put next to a guy who's as good as he is offensively to win at the highest level. Like, I don't think it's like, yeah, I do think it would be a little bit of a messy fit with like a Devin Booker or a player like that, even a Jalen Brunson, as we've seen. I don't think Jalen Brunson was as good as he is now. Of course, but that aside, it still seemed like a bit of a messy fit. So I I just think he's good enough that you can surround him with, a Vince Williams Jr. type. No, we were talking about Vince Williams Jr. before we started the pod. But like guys who play hard defense, can shoot threes, can do a little bit more off the dribble, but like don't need the ball a ton, don't command high usage. And I think you could surround Luka with those guys, and they can be really successful. I think the best point that I thought you brought up, Geoff, is that I didn't consider strongly when we had that conversation was the fact that it's hard to find players who are good enough, like that are good enough to like get you to that level, but that are also okay with playing that role. Because we see a guy like OG Anunoby, who I think would clearly be an amazing partner for Luka Doncic. It would be like a perfect partnership. A guy like OG Anunoby is like, I want more on-ball reps. Like I want more usage myself, right? So these guys, when they reach a certain level, they're not going to be like kind of like chill with just being like, I'll spot up in the corner, wait for Luka to kick it to me every now and then I'll just play extremely hard-nosed defense on the other end. Like I think that is like a true human aspect of the dynamic that's going to be hard to find. And so to me, that's like the most limiting factor for Luka. But otherwise, yeah.
I do find it weird that Grant Williams has struggled so much in Dallas. Like he's 25 years old. He shot really good in Boston the last few years. And I brought up the Boston White Magic. There's something going on there. Like the last 2 seasons, 64% true shooting, 60% true shooting, 41% from three, 39.5% from three. The 3-point shooting has only dipped a little bit, but man, he's just been, everything else has fallen off completely, especially from the mid-range. And I don't want to confuse correlation with causation. I'm not saying it's Luka's fault, but I am curious how, if you really dove into the film in Boston, if his roles were just different or if it's just variance and if the shooting's just worse. I'd assume it's the latter, but it is interesting that he's just been terrible this season in Dallas.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I would guess that it's just him like, because I don't think it's like super easy to play the role. I don't know how different his role is in ball. I mean, I think he wanted an expanded role, and I think he has like the same role. Like he's he spots up in the corner and they ask him to play defense and he doesn't do it that well, and then he has to hit shots when he's open. I mean, it's not a ton of difference. Maybe it's different between Tatum and Luka in terms of their heliocentricness, but when you have Tatum and Brown, right? Like I feel like those guys are going to soak up usage equivalent to or more than that of Luka. So it's just like you're just kind of playing the same role, but you're like second fiddle to one player as opposed to, third fiddle to two players. And obviously Grant Williams is not second or third fiddle, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And of course, Luka has a long history of elevating other role player types. So like, I just can't get past, or it's hard for me to get past. Like we discussed a hypothetical team build for him. I don't even know where the Mavericks go. Like how, like, because they've tried both extremes almost. Like I know they haven't built like a full big three with stars and scrubs, but they have tried, they made the big trade for Porzingis. They didn't see value in retaining Brunson because they were like, oh, well, next to Luka, is he worth 9 figures? Clearly that was mistaken. They traded for Kyrie Irving. And then they've also done the thing, they made the Western Conference Finals with a worse Jalen Brunson and a bunch of role players, with Luka just basically carrying the load. And I do think that like they're starting to feel pressure in terms of, how can we make sure that Luka retires a Maverick? What is the optimal team build? So I guess I'm going to turn it to you, because we discussed a little bit the last time we talked about him. Like, I think it's doable to build around Luka. I know in theory you basically just want to surround him with shooting and defense, but do you have any, like, where do the Mavericks go from here? Because I do think that we both very firmly agree that like Luka is a fringe MVP candidate who probably isn't going to win MVP, but like he is an MVP level player. So how do the Mavericks help him get over the top to where the team is good enough that all of a sudden he's going to be in MVP discussions?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that specific question about where the Mavericks go. I do have an answer to the question of what's a good team build for Luka. And it is probably a team that has, the aforementioned OG Anunoby, probably a team that has, a guy like Quentin Grimes, who's, a great defensive player and shoots, upwards of 38% from three. A guy like Dante DiVincenzo, who can wreak havoc defensively and shoots, 42% from three, seemingly consistently at this point. A guy like Deuce McBride, who's an excellent defensive player who also shoots tremendously from three. And a guy who can take off some of the weight from him, a better version of the Jalen Brunson that he had with him in Dallas. The current Jalen Brunson. I'm obviously joking, but also pretty serious. Like, if I was to say what's the best team build for Luka, I would say you pull Randall off of the Knicks and you put Luka Doncic on that team. I think that would be. I don't know how you would beat that team. Honestly, I don't know how any team would beat that team.
Yeah, especially Luka is elite at. He kind of has what Harden had in Houston in terms of getting the most out of limited centers. Like both Dwight Powell and Derek Lively have true shooting percentages above 70% this season. I think it's 73 and 74%. Yeah. And that's almost entirely due to playing with Luka. So like we know the Knicks have two of those guys who Luka would just absolutely maximize. And then you put him on a team with tons of shooting and defense. I don't know, and for everybody knows that XJ is talking about the Knicks. I don't know. I feel like the Knicks would want to keep Randall.
Come on.
Which would be hilarious.
No, not with Randall. That would not be the ideal team build, in my opinion.
Of course, I agree. I'm just saying that there are people who just view basketball differently, and they'd be like, oh man, Brunson, Luka, and Randall, the big three, that's how they would view it. And
no, I gotta imagine, like, and I'm not saying that Dallas is never going to want to trade Luka. Like, they're just never going to want to. Like, you just don't trade an MVP level player in his prime, potentially even pre-prime. You just don't. Like, you go down with the ship, I think, in my opinion. But if they were ever forced into a situation to trade him, I mean, Julius Randle is obviously a hometown guy. Knicks have a horde of draft picks and potential young players. I mentioned a couple that would probably be involved in a deal: Quentin Grimes and Deuce McBride, if they were ever to make a trade for Luka. But yeah, I just imagine that is a situation that would work really well without Julius Randle, because I just don't think that's too much usage. Like, that is, like, you can't have Randle, who is not the best spot up shooter, obviously. And that's probably being kind, and Jalen Brunson and Luka. Like, I think Brunson and Luka is enough. Even in the Tibbs system, Luka would love to ISO and dance with the ball and, do whatever he wants to do. I think that'd be tremendous for them. But that aside, like, obviously, where can Dallas go from here? I'm not really sure. I don't have a great answer for that question, but I do think that I can imagine, Luka is 24 years old. I can imagine him getting into a situation. I think he's going to be 25 in February. I can imagine him getting into a situation before he's like 30. That would be, we would see him in championship contention as like the heliocentric driver of an offense.
It is kind of, from a team building perspective, it is a catch-22. Like, think about all these really good role players, or not all, but most of these really good role players you find, they develop naturally, right? So like Derek White, for example, it's not like he just randomly was great in Boston. It was a slow rise in San Antonio, where he played a lot of minutes off of, in different team builds, and he grew and he learned and he evolved as a player. And you don't just go to Dallas and learn and evolve. Like, you're thrown immediately into the fire. And so that is one of the things that really, really makes it difficult. You take a look at a guy like Josh Green. I think that Josh Green profiles as somebody who could be one of those really good role players. I think he could be, in theory, a 3-and-D plus guy because he's shown some off the bounce game, some ability to attack closeouts, but there isn't trial and error because you go to Dallas, you have Luka, they're expected to compete right now. They're trying to compete. And so I do think that one of the really tough things for Dallas right now is it's hard to acquire a free agent that would fit with Luka because they're just not available. You want those guys. You want those guys on your team. You go through the list of guys who you say, oh yeah, great fit with Luka. I bet the team that person's on probably wants that player. So, sure, like Alex Caruso would be an amazing pickup for them if they were able to get him. And Chicago just lost last night to Toronto at home. So I know there was some reporting today that Chicago isn't looking to trade anybody. Like if you're a Bulls fan, you're listening to this team has got to make moves. Like you cannot just stand pat with this core. You cannot do it. It's just there's no direction. But I don't know how Dallas is supposed to acquire talent, I guess, that works with Luka. Because if it's through the draft, okay, how many more draft picks, look at their roster right now. How many of these guys were drafted? Olivier Maxence Prosper, young guy who's expected to develop, has no chance of developing. Jaden Hardy, young guy, trying to develop, can't develop. They can't live with his lumps, even when his talent. Josh Green, a wing who can guard up and tries really hard and can shoot, even if the shooting is shaky. He's shooting 39% from three this season. There's just no consistent role for these guys and no way to no development curve or no development path. And so I don't know what you're supposed to do. I feel like the Mavs have dug themselves into a spot that's really tough for them.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I very strongly agree with you. And I think you're making great points. That's why I don't have an answer to the question of what can the Mavs do? And if the question is can Luka be, the central piece of a championship team in Dallas specifically, I'd probably be on your side. Probably not. I don't think so. But can he be in general? And will he be? I think the answer to that is yes, because I think he's going to end up somewhere else. I think he's probably going to end up somewhere else. And like I said, if you were to ship him into a team like New York, let's say, you immediately have it. You immediately have the championship contender as long as you don't give up, the right pieces. Again, you probably have to give up a Grimes and a McBride in a deal, but you'd still have it, right? That's my point. So I guess it's in Dallas. Yeah, I don't think there's much hope for them. I'm sorry to Mavericks fan. I'm not laughing. It's just it's a tough situation. But for Luka specifically, I think there's a lot of upside that you can see. He can get into the right situation. I think I could see it happen for him.
Yeah, I assume we'll never know. One part of this we haven't really brought up, and the European players just seemed very loyal. You have Jokic, and just historically you have Dirk. Maybe that's where I'm driving this from, but it does seem like they are willing to wait it out and they want to try to make it work, and they put it on themselves. And there's a lot of humility and a lot of self-reflection. And so me personally, I think he's in Dallas for the long run, the long haul.
I think maybe that's true generally. I'd have to think more about the players, but I think Luka is different. I don't see it for Luka. I see Luka as get me out of here. I want to win somewhere. I don't care about these people or this. Not that he won't care. I'm sure he cares and cares about the people in the organization and everybody that he's come up with. But I just see him as that's not his prime priority, and he's not going to value that over winning a championship. I feel it seems, at least, and if it's not true, he's a really good actor. It seems like losing is devastating to him. And I think he's going to want to win more than he's going to want to be loyal to the Mavericks organization. At least that's my perception.
Yeah, I agree. But I think someone like Dirk, I think he wanted to win more than anything. And I think that's what made his ultimate championship so satisfying. You could legitimately make the argument that Dirk won the most satisfying championship of I don't know, the 21st century. Like, I don't know how many stack up to it. This guy was like, how many early playoff exits did he have? How many times? Like, he was the 2007, they lost as the 1 seed when they won 67 games. They had a number of first round exits, and he stuck it out. And through multiple coaches, Avery Johnson and Don Nelson, and losing Steve Nash, and how many iterations of that team. And the one constant was Dirk and his loyalness to the city. And I don't think it would be reasonable to be like, oh, well, he must have just been too loyal and he didn't care about winning. I'd imagine winning drove him. And eventually he saw it all through, and they finally were able to get a team, which, in retrospect was probably your dream team. It was like there was this great offensive option surrounded by defense and shooting. They were one of the earliest iterations of that team. Kidd was an amazing shooter at that point in Dallas. They had Page at the end of his run. They had Jason Terry. They had Sean Marion, who could shoot some threes. They had Tyson Chandler in the middle, back then when interior defense was even more important because threes weren't as big a thing. And so my point is that I do think that it's possible that winning could drive Luka, but it could just be, okay, I'm going to stick it out here, and I'm just going to put more pressure on the organization. And that's why I think it's kind of fascinating to try and think about it from the Mavericks perspective and just think about where they go forward. And for me, it starts and ends with Kyrie Irving. I think eventually they're going to realize that they've got to turn him into multiple assets, because their depth of assets right now is just so poor.
Yeah, I would absolutely, if I was, running the Mavericks, that would be the person I'd be trying to move. I just don't know what you get for him. I mean, he's still a tremendous, amazing player, obviously, an unbelievable player, but just with everything surrounding him, his availability, I mean, spoiler, he's not going to make our all-star team here because he has played like 60-something% of their games, and it's just not enough. Actually, he's played 57% of their games so far, 27 of 47 games. So I think that's the guy to move, because I think you'd rather have, and I'd rather have, I mean, maybe you wouldn't, I'd rather have a guy, 2 or 3 guys who are just better fits with Luka than somebody who is singularly at the level of ability that Kyrie Irving has. But I just think that they're stuck with him. I don't know what you're gonna get for Kyrie Irving at this standpoint. But I would say before we move to our reserves, somebody who that's what I was going to say. I think that Dirk believed that they could build a winner there. He had to buy in. I think, he was sold on that idea, and he bought into that idea, and it ended up being true and paying dividends. And that's great. I don't know that Luka is going to be able to be bought into that idea. Somebody who is probably not bought into the idea that they can win a championship, I would imagine, is LeBron James. And I just wanted to give a shout out to LeBron James, who we have as a starter. LeBron James, who we have as a starter at 39 years old, a starter in the Western Conference All-Star team. And it's not based on a fan vote. It's not based on, a lifetime achievement award. It's based on merit. Like, literally, LeBron James deserves to be one of the 3 best and most impactful front court players in the Western Conference at age 39 years old. Like, I just want to stop for a second. I know we've done a couple of times, like, talked about like the ridiculousness of that we're seeing with LeBron James, but it's just that this fact is completely insane to me. He's played 44 or 49 games, so he's been available. His shooting's been incredible, 39%, one of the best numbers of his career. Just everything he's been able to do on both ends is having a renaissance defensive season overall. It's just been completely incredible, and I just think it's amazing that we're here with LeBron James being, a clear and obvious choice for our Western Conference All-Star team.
Yeah, it's so funny. I remember 10 years ago in 2014 in his last season in Miami, when Spoelstra was giving Bosch and Wade rest days as LeBron just tried to carry that Heat team by himself through stretches. And I remember people being like, eventually LeBron's going to have to pass the torch. When is he going to be the guy who is rested because it's okay to rest him? And then he went to Cleveland, and people were like, finally, there's a young guy, Kyrie Irving. He's going to get to pass the torch. And then Kyrie gets hurt in their first playoff run, and Kyrie's Kyrie. So like, and I would argue, honestly, that the best stretch of Kyrie's career was the 3 years he played with LeBron in Cleveland, like the most reliable he was and the most consistent his output was. But even then, it never came close to LeBron. It never even approached it. And LeBron was still the guy playing crazy games, playing all these games. And then he goes to LA, and he has that first season where he gets hurt and LA misses the playoffs. They sign a youngish Anthony Davis, they trade for a youngish Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
And this is the guy. This is supposed to be the guy that takes the mantle from him and allows LeBron to finally, take the foot off the throttle and pass the torch. And Anthony Davis hasn't taken it. And now all of a sudden Anthony Davis is 32 years old. And he's never once been better than LeBron. Never once in their time on the Lakers has he been a better player than LeBron. It's just, unprecedented is not a strong enough word. He's just
the guy he's going to pass the mantle to has always been his son. That's he's waiting to pass the mantle until his son turns 21 and is in the NBA. And then he's like, all right, finally I'll do it. I'm 42. Fine. All right, I'll do it. I'll take some rest days.
That poor kid, man. I hope it works out for him, because like the expectations and what, like, everybody is just like, dude, you need to be good enough so that you can play with LeBron. And like, I was watching a USC game the other day, and they had like one of those pregame graphics, and it was like USC's big three, and then it was like two of their two best players, and then the third one was Bronny James, and like for their two best players, it had like their stats and stuff they do well. And then like Bronny James things was just like exists. It was like has heart and is a winner or something like that.
Because he's averaging like 5 points or something like that. Yeah,
because they couldn't actually like show his stats. It's like, dude, that sucks. Like, just let the kid be a kid. Let him learn.
But I do think I would say for Bronny, like, he seems like he has such a good head on his shoulders. Like, like LeBron's done like an incredible job with this kid who's like been raised in this kind of insane world that we have right now with social media, and he's on social media, and it's just he seemed just so well adjusted. It's like incredible to me. Like, it might even be more impressive than LeBron's NBA career is like raising Bronny in this ridiculous social media age and how well adjusted he is. So I think he can handle whatever it is,
Yeah, and I just think it's just another thing we take for granted with LeBron. Like, this has been, think about all the stories we have about, players from previous generations. Like, we know from the 90s that Michael Jordan was up all night the night before a playoff game gambling in Atlantic City. Like, that's a story that we know. There's nothing like that for LeBron. There's nothing. Like, he's been since he was 18 years old. He was gifted a Hummer before he played an NBA game. And like, he got $100 million contract from Nike before he played an NBA game. He's 2-time on Sports Illustrated before he'd played an NBA game on the cover of whatever that issue was. 0 off the court issues, appears to be a really great family man. I just think that when he's gone, people are going to look back, and I hope there are people who look back and are like, oh shit, I should have appreciated him on the court. But I am very confident that there are going to be people who look back, and the league is going to be a little bit more in flux and not as consistent. And we're going to be like, man, we really took for granted having a face of the league who just carried it forward like LeBron did, because it's truly remarkable what he's done for the NBA and what he's done for himself. And like, the fact that he had all these expectations and he's overachieved expectations is just,
it's ridiculous.
It's just so ridiculous. Like, he's just been better than, and he stayed better. If I see him at a loss for words, because I don't know how to talk about this guy anymore, because he's almost 40 years old and he's still a top 10 player in the NBA. Like, that's, it's just,
imagine your expectation is at 18 years old, like this could be one of the greatest players ever, and then you surpass that expectation. Like that is just
Right.
it's just absurd. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I mean, you mentioned like obviously LeBron is still somehow the face of the NBA, and I don't know if I don't know who's next in line for that when he finally slows down, which I'm not going to put any parameters around when that might be. But if we look at our Western Conference reserves, we got a couple guys in the backcourt, James Harden and Devin Booker. Devin Booker is someone I'm interested as why he's not more of a face of the NBA. Devin Booker is like the prototypical, like he plays like, the Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan style insofar as like he is driving, he's pulling up and shooting jumpers. He's like still a mid-range maestro, like I think he shot 50% from the mid-range last year. He's shooting 47% from the mid-range this year, and they're all like self-created pull-up jumpers. Like and he's just like one of the best at it, like potentially one of the best ever at it. He's so good, an American-born player that that I think matters to the media in some way. Like it doesn't matter to me personally, but I hear that being a narrative a lot. Actually, well, I'm wrong. He's shooting 50% from the mid range this year. Actually, he is 50% from the mid range, 52% last year, 47% the year before, 51% the year before, 46% the year before, 49% the year before. That is ridiculous that he is so effective from the mid-range on high volume, one of the highest volume mid-range shooters in the NBA. Like that's like, it's actually like nonsense, honestly, that I'm thinking about it out loud. And he's converted like his backcourt mate that we have in the Western Conference reserves, James Harden, to a full-time point guard essentially this year. And he's been incredible at it. 96th percentile in assist percentage this year as well. So, this guy's been unbelievable for several years now, and the way that he plays, his style of play, his intensity, his success on the on the Olympic stage as well. Why is this guy not a face of the NBA? I don't get it.
I just want to add on real quick. He's also maintained his turnover percentage while taking a huge role. He has the same exact turnover percentage as last season.
That's crazy.
Despite basically overhauling his role. And then you also mentioned his mid-range efficiency. He's in the 99th percentile all 4 of the last 4 seasons in terms of volume from the mid-range. I sent you that tweet last night from NBA University. He's taken more mid-range shots than like anyone in the top 10, or he's taken the most mid-range shots of anyone in the league this season, or maybe the second most. And he has by far the best efficiency of anyone near the top 10. He's a unicorn when it comes to self-creating good high floor shots. And to add to your point about why, or not, to add to your question about why he's not more of a face of the league, when you can create high floor buckets like this consistently, that correlates with strong success in the playoffs because defenses get tighter. You're not going to be able to get as many of these open threes. If you can do this in spite of whatever defense is thrown at you, you're going to just consistently be able to score at a high level. And we saw him break out in the playoffs last season. They didn't have, they were missing guys. They were dealing with injuries. They ended up losing in 6 to Denver, the eventual champions. And Booker was amazing in the playoffs. And that's even more reason for the league to start featuring this guy more. I don't really have many theories. I know that there are people who aren't a huge fan of his personality, I guess, like on the court. He seems a bit whiny, I guess. I don't know. Like you just see him. It seems like he is involved in more tiffs than a guy of his impact level seemed to be in. Luka, Klay Thompson, like Booker is always, he doesn't seem very well liked by non-teammates of his. And I mean, he got into it with Paolo the other day. Paolo called him a bitch on the court. There was that viral clip of Paolo being like, dude, stop being a bitch. You've been crying all game, and I'm not saying this is reason for him to not be the face of the league, but I'm just surmising like maybe he's just not the most like player. I have no idea because he certainly deserves to be one of the young faces of the league in terms of his impact and just how not only his impact, but how much fun it is to watch him when he's going, because he is just one of the purest, for lack of a better word, hoopers in the league. The dude can just fucking ball, and he's great.
Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe has something to do with it. I definitely think I don't feel like it's controversial to say that Devin Booker is a bit of a whiner, so that maybe that has something to do with it. Again, going through our reserves for the front court in the Western Conference, we have Devin Booker's teammate Kevin Durant, who thinks should surprise no one, Anthony Davis here, and Paul George, as well as our three front court players. Any one of those specific guys you want to talk about? I think they all have like interesting stories that we can cover, but
they do. I mean, Paul George. This isn't a question so much about Paul George, but I do think. I mean, if I recall correctly, XJ, before the Clippers broke out, you were very high on the Clippers ceiling, weren't you? When we had this discussion, a few months ago, and you were basically like, yeah, I think this team can win a championship. And
before they got Harden or after they got Harden?
It was after. I think it was after they got Harden, and we were talking about what the ceiling for this team can be. And I think you were the one. I think I was a little bit more down on them.
Yeah.
And I think you said, no, I think this team is a legit championship contender. I could be wrong about that.
No, I did. I said that on our pod, and I said that on a different one as well, a feature that I did. Yeah, I've always been very high on this team ceiling, and I thought it was really funny when they had Harden, and then they went on they lost like the first 4 games or the first 5 games, and everybody was like, oh, this didn't work. This is it's just like, and then I think Harden came out and said, oh, when we figure it out, it's going to be scary hours, like whatever. And everybody was laughing at him. And I was like, I wouldn't laugh at him. I don't know. And then, now they're a monster.
But also remember, they started Russ the first few games.
Yeah, well, there you go. When we figure this out, Matt, when we figure out we need to not have Westbrook out there with us.
Yeah. This team is, to steal Harden's lingo, this team is scary. It's actually shocking to me how willing George and Leonard have been to sort of slide into lesser roles, which is probably smart given their age and the wear and tear on their body and their injury history. And all of a sudden, Harden is creating so many of the advantages for them. And George and Kawhi are basically just advantage attack. Like they're just, their self-creation is down. And it's just working perfectly. Like I know you said when we talked about the Eastern Conference teams that Harden is one of the few stars whose usage is sub 20%. But I think all that does is represent how flawed a stat usage is, because it doesn't consider assist percentage.
Well, just to say real quick, on that note, I don't like usage, but I wouldn't describe it as like a flawed stat. I would describe it as just like it is what it is, right? Like there's only so much you can interpret from usage, and I think people use it to interpret more from it than it actually conveys, which is not the fault of the stat, it's the fault of the people using it in that way. So, but yeah, in essence, I agree with you, but I just think it is what it is. It just says what it says,
Is there to bring it back? And by the way, I seemingly threw shade at Russ, and we talked about how Russ has been good this season. Russ has been a good role player for them, and he is another example of someone who has slid into a role and just accepted. I think there are a few issues. The main issue to me is that both Terrence Mann and Norman Powell have not been very good this season. And I think if they're going to win at the highest level, they are going to need more gravity from their non-big three. I think they're going to need a little bit more shooting. And I think it's possible to get that from Powell and Mann. I think they've shown it in the past. And by the way, Powell's shooting 45% from three. I just mean like his overall impact hasn't been great this season. But maybe with how good George, Leonard, and Harden are, just the shooting is enough. Like if just Powell brings shooting, that'll be enough. But I guess my point is that I do think Do you think, XJ, that they have enough, or do you think that they're going to need to make a trade and bring in a little bit more shooting to get to the top?
I I think they have enough. I don't think they need to make a trade. I think I could imagine them making a deal for a wing type that can shoot really pretty well, maybe a two guard wing type that can shoot. But I don't really think they need it. Like, I think they have enough if these guys stay healthy. And health is always the concern. And I think that's what I brought up when we talked about them before. It's just like, obviously the elephant in the room is like, contingent on them staying healthy, they'll be a championship contender. To me right now, they're the championship favorite. And I think that's without making a move. Like
Over Boston.
yeah, over Boston. I'm at that stage where I'm moving them forward into the championship favorite status, and that is big because you and I both love Boston, what they do, what they've done there, like their approach. Obviously, I'm incredibly high in their approach, having 5 out, shooting a ton of threes. That is like my dream situation. I just think and it's not just for like health reasons, but like I just think there's a limited reliability with some of their guys. Jaylen Brown, Porzingis can be up and down at times. I don't know if I like trust those guys. I think if these guys are healthy, Harden, Paul George, and Leonard, they're just going to be what they are, and they work together so flawlessly. Like, it's the kind of synergy that I think we don't often think about a ton, because at least for me, I think when I think about synergy, I think of like, an offensive play, like a high level guard and a high level defensive center or something like that, or a pick and roll partners, or, guys who create off the dribble and guys who can spot up really well, like those kinds of synergistic dynamics. For me, it's just like the fact that Harden can, and you mentioned it, he creates such an advantage that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, like, attacking an advantage is crazy. Like, it makes those guys like unstoppable. What can you do with them? They both can create for themselves like very well at an extremely high level. Now, if they're getting the ball, attacking a defense that is out of sorts already, they're not stoppable. Those guys are not stoppable. And the only thing I would say is that I don't know that I believe Kawhi Leonard's 44% shooting from three. I don't know that I'm buying that. I will say he shot 41% last year and 40% the year before. So I do think he is like an incredible 3-point shooter, underrated 3-point shooter. In fact, he shot 44% from three one of the years in San Antonio. So I do think he's an incredible 3-point shooter. I don't think that that's not real. Also has always been near 90% from the free throw line for the last like 7 years. So I think the shooting's real. I just don't know if he's at that level, but it could just be because, more of his threes are coming off the catch, and you probably have the numbers in front of you. I don't know what the percentage is, but then also just the fact that
this is George, right?
No, I'm talking about Kawhi.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Keep going though.
So I just pulled it up. So percent assisted, Kawhi is being assisted on 68.5% of his 3-pointers, which is that's relatively high for him. It's not high for the league. It's still only 9th percentile in the league, but yeah, I just think that these guys really work so well together, those three, and then having Zubac down there again, as long as he's healthy, I think it just works so perfectly. And Westbrook off the bench, he's really doubled his effort and refocused on the defensive end, and he's having probably one of his best defensive seasons of his career, one of his best seasons since I would say maybe the Houston days, honestly. So I think it all works. I believe in Powell as a shooter. I think Powell's shooting has always been real. So I think that he'll kind of get it together as much as he possibly can in the other ways, but shooting's going to be real. And I don't know if anybody would suggest this, so maybe this is crazy, but I do think Bones Highland is going to be a factor at some point down the line here. He started off the season horribly, and then
wait. What do you mean? What are we talking about here? Like a factor how? Like he's gonna give a motivational speech before a game or something?
I think he'll be a factor in terms of playing spot minutes in the playoffs and coming through in big moments, hitting shots. I do think so. Is he
even in the rotation right now?
Well, when he's not healthy. So he came back and played like 10 minutes recently against Boston. he had a DNP coach's decision earlier, but like I think he'll make the rotation, and I think he'll play good minutes. And I'm going out on a limb here. I'm not saying this is a limb.
This is a limb. This is going out on a limb.
But you know what the best part about going out on a limb is that in the playoffs, I can clip this, and then when it happens, it's gonna look crazy. It's gonna look so prescient. It's gonna look insane, and I'm gonna include all of this in it. But
no, you don't get to do that, because anytime anytime somebody else says something ridiculous and they end up being right, you always say, no, that's not proof that your process was good. It's proof you got lucky.
But I do have a process for it.
If Bones Highland ends up balling out in the playoffs, I'm not going to think any differently about what you're saying right now. I'm still going to think.
Why is Bones Highland bad as a player? As an offensive player, why is Bones Highland bad and like incapable of being like a useful piece in the playoffs?
Because he doesn't shoot off the catch. Like he's not super comfortable shooting off the catch. He's much more comfortable shooting off the bounce. And if Bones Highland has the ball enough in his hands to develop a rhythm, your offense isn't going to be good. Like he's that catch-22 of offense heavy player. Like, he's a worse Cam Thomas basically.
There's no worse Cam Thomas. I'm sorry, but
yes, there is.
It's not Bones Highland.
Yes, it is.
I disagree with you. I think that Bones Highland has a bad reputation now, and I do think that I think that. So I'm okay. I finally pulled up his stats. Per EPM, offensive EPM in his rookie season was plus 1.3.
Huh? You scrolled down enough to find them?
Yeah, I just pulled them up. So 1.3, plus 1.3 offensive EPM in his first season, plus 0.7 offensive EPM in his second season. Those are both 79th percentile or higher. Shot 37% from three second season, 37% his first season. Always been a mid 80s% free throw shooter. I think Bones Highland can be a useful piece in spot minutes and a championship run. And I think that is a justified opinion. And so based on his shooting, based on his offensive impact that we've seen in all of his career, it's only 2 years, all of his career besides this year. And I think that we'll see that come to fruition. But obviously, my case for the Clippers being the championship favorites is not contingent on Bones Highland. It's about what I was talking about with the synergy between Harden, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. And I think it's just rare that you have a quote unquote big three with players who are that good offensively who fit together that well. You can have big threes, but oftentimes when you have a big three, there's offensive redundancy among that big three. And this is a big three who I don't think has very much offensive redundancy, which is incredible. So I think that's to me why I would put them up there.
It's so funny that you say that, because I was legitimately going to ask you, have we ever seen a big three that like fits together this well and is this synergetic? And they're all shooting over 40% from three. They're all like, I mean, props to James Harden. Dude is defending his ass off this season. He's like, I don't know why. Maybe it's because he was, asked to do way more in Houston, and he has elite hands, by the way. Like the way he's able to get into passing lanes, the way he's able to, if somebody tries to drive past him or take him in the mid post, he gets, a lot of steals. He's in the 72nd percentile in steal percentage.
In his Houston days, he was one of the steal leaders in the NBA for many of those years. So
that was proof that his defense was underrated in Houston. I shouldn't have been as dismissive, I guess, about Bones Highland. I think I'm still just put off because there was a Knicks fan who tweeted, this is who everybody wants Emmanuel Quickly to be, and posted a picture of Bones Highland, and that fucking infuriated me. So
yeah, that's like a parody, dude. That's a parody. That's like funny. That's not a real take. That's not the take that I gave, obviously.
Yeah, you just think he's going to be instrumental to their title run. That's it. You just think.
I think he'll play spot minutes are going to be critical. Like there's always a player like that in a title run.
There is. I agree.
And I think he can be that player, because you said, should they make a deal? Do they need to make a deal to get somebody? And what are you going to get on the trade market, really? Like, what are they going to get on the trade market, really? Like, I imagine that they're going to get a guy who is going to play spot minutes, is going to play like 14 minutes per game, and is going to be able to make an impact in small periods during their playoff run. So I think they already have a guy like that. I think Bones Highland's going to be that guy. That's all I'm saying.
So
Not that they wouldn't win without him, obviously.
I would bet that when the Clippers make the playoffs, if they're healthy, this is very contingent on them being healthy. They're just going to have an 8-man rotation. Like they're starting
with these guys, with these freaking injury-prone players. They're just going to run 8 men out there and play Paul George 40 minutes and Kawhi Leonard 40 minutes.
Yeah, I think. Well,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
And a 35-year-old James Harden.
I don't think they need to play those guys 40 minutes to run an 8-man rotation. Because this isn't like a Tibbs thing. These guys all play multiple positions. There's lots of versatility across their roles. In a game, there's only 240 minutes. So you've got 8 guys. I think you can get them to settle in at 36 to 38 minutes a night in the playoffs. And
you're just putting a lot of confidence into like Terrence Mann, who I don't have a ton of confidence in. Like I assume he's part of your 8-man rotation.
Of course.
Yeah, I just don't have the confidence in Terrence Mann. Like I've never been the Terrence Mann guy. I don't really get the Terrence Mann hype. Like I don't really understand it. So I think if you're playing Terrence Mann enough minutes that you only need to do an 8-man rotation, I think he's killing you in those minutes, like against playoff rosters. Yeah, I think that can be the difference. That can be the difference between a title.
You think Terrence Mann is killing you, but that Bones Highland can help you. I don't know how we
Bones Highland. I'm talking about Bones Highland playing like 10 minutes. You're talking about Terrence Mann playing like 25 minutes. There's a big difference.
Yeah, I guess I'm just higher on Mann than you. I don't know. I just think. I mean, he's literally been, I'm not going to say spearheaded, but been a big part of a playoff run already. Like their ability to just stick him out there and, with the Paul George lineups when Kawhi was hurt in 2021, that was a huge part of that. And go small against Utah. They literally made the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, that was his best like stretch of NBA basketball of his career. Like I don't know why I would expect that to happen again. He has not had a full season that's been as good as that playoff run, and this season he's been pretty bad.
His 25-year-old season was pretty good. I agree. This season he's been underwhelming. That's one of my concerns about the Clippers is that as good as their big three is and as good as Zubats is, I don't know how much they have outside of that. And if you're telling me that Bones Highland getting spot minutes is part of it, I'm not so sure I'm as
if Terrence Mann plays like even as well as he played last year, which wasn't that great on net, like they're clearly the championship favorite in my opinion. Like I'm not even including Terrence Mann in my evaluation as like, and I know you're being funny about it, but I'm not. Bones Highland being a part of the rotation is not like a contingency for their championship. I just said that I think he can help them. I'm not saying like, well, if Bones Highland doesn't show up, then they're not. I would change their ranking. Like it's not a contingency for me. I'm just saying that that was a separate point that I was making. You have Terrence Mann as being like critical to the success of the team and being like, right? Am I right or wrong?
I wouldn't say critical. I just think they're gonna. My point was that I think they're going to all play enough minutes that I don't think Bones Highland's going to see the court in a meaningful playoff run.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think Terrence Mann has to like be even as good as he was in that 2021 playoff run. I just think he has to hold his own defensively and not shoot terribly when he's asked to shoot.
He can't shoot 31% from 3 or else
correct.
He may be out of the playoff rotation, but that's fair. That's fair. But
go ahead. You go. I was just going to say something like their big three plus Powell plus Zubats will probably be their most used lineup.
Yeah, I agree.
And then you have Russ and you have Mann and you have one of the backup bigs to spare Zubats when they're not going small, whether that's Tice or Plumlee.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's their playoff rotation.
No, I agree. I think that's fair, but regardless, we have the Clippers with, three all-stars, which is incredible, who all fit seamlessly together. Again, to recap, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and Paul George, we have all in, Harden and George as the reserves. Our final two reserves are the wild cards in the West. We have Lauri Markkanen and we have Steph Curry. I think that it's just kind of funny that Steph Curry here is, at least to me, clearly the most controversial selection for the All-Star team. And that's kind of funny to say. Like, I wouldn't imagine, I would say that. But I think that when we talked about who it should be, it was down in terms of the wild card. It was down between Curry and Anthony Edwards. And there's a compelling case on either side of it. And I don't know if you want to talk about that or just talk about Curry in general.
I would like to, first of all, I do think we need to dive into that. So I just want to push that conversation back for a second. I'm going to say something that I think you're going to find blasphemous. I was incredibly, incredibly underwhelmed by watching Lauri Markkanen against the Knicks last night. I thought it was...
Dude, it's not blasphemous. It was like one game that he was bad in that game. That's not blasphemous. Like, he was objectively bad in that game.
He was bad in a way that I was like, are we sure? Like, are we sure? I know the data. Players are allowed to have bad games, but it's not like he just shot bad. He got fucking fed his lunch by Precious Achiuwa. Like, he couldn't do anything. And so we joke all the time. Me and you have been joking, the last week or two about how Colin Sexton's ascension, like Colin views this as his team now, and Sexton and Clarkson are sort of like suppressing Lowry's role, and that's not good for the Jazz. But I guess I'm concerned, or not concerned, I'm curious, like, how much more really is there for Lowry? Because I think the more I watch him, the more I realize he's more reliant on it. Like, he would be perfect on the Clippers with Harden, for example, because I think he actually is reliant on an advantage being created for him.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, that's always been. I mean, okay, so I'll say the reason why Lauri Markkanen is one of my favorite players in the NBA is because, not because he can't self-create. That's always been the issue for Jazz fans specifically. So, like, I'm connected with a few Jazz communities, and that's the issue. It's like they're always, you can't create. When it's at the end of the game, you can't go to Lowry. That's always been the knock on Lauri Markkanen the past 2 years, and I think that that's fine. I just don't value that as much as I value what he can do off ball and the gravity that he has and the way that he can cash in when advantages are created in terms of his spot up shooting, being one of the best spot up shooters in the league across 2 years. We see his impact. I think players, there's not many players who can impact the game as immensely as he can without having the ball in his hands. And that's why I love him as a player so much. Not because I think they need to run sets, they can run sets from all in terms of coming off ball screens and stuff. But I don't think it's like they need to have Lowry run high pick and roll. Like, that's not the kind of player he is. And if you're trying to do that, there's a reason why they run things through Sexton and through Clarkson when he's on the court. And it's not because those guys are better players than him, but they're just better at that role. And he needs a player who is better than those guys are at that role. So that I don't think I saw anything that was like different than what I understood.
I guess it just seemed like stark to me, or it stood out to me. I guess I expected more. And it's not like this was my first time watching Lowry. I watched a ton of him. It was just like a very jarring performance, I guess, in the sense of how limited he is. But I guess if I'm trying to fully understand, to try and simplify and fully understand your perspective, let's say, we're looking at like NBA 2K rankings, and let's say, NBA 2K has Lowry as a 90 and Julius Randle as a 92. Your perspective basically is that, okay, that might be true, but pair Lowry with a Jalen Brunson and the sum of their parts will be closer to 100% of their individual ratings than if you paired Julius Randle with. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, I would say that that's wrong. I would say that they shouldn't have Randall as a 92 and Lowry as a 90. Yeah, I would say that that's a bad rating. Because I think that I think that he brings off-ball value that is greater than the on-ball value that Randall brings and net when we're talking about like overall. So what I mean by that is if you have Lowry on the court, your team is going to perform better than if you have Randall on the court, all things equal. Obviously, if you put them in roles that are not good for them, right? Like if I put Randall in Lowry's role, it'd be awful. Like it wouldn't make any sense, right? It'd be like this Randall's garbage. And if I put Lowry in Randall's role, it'd be like, what are you do? Like this guy's not as good. This guy's a fraud or whatever, right? Like that's what we would say. But all of it is role contingent, right? So to me, it's like that goes back to what I was saying about the Derek White thing, where we're like, okay, like we have these roles and we're saying you get extra credit if you're in this primary creator on ball role, and if you're doing this other role, it's not as valuable. But I don't think that's inherently the case. I think that that's the case in many situations, but I don't think it's inherently that this role is more valuable than the other one. So that's why I make the argument as far as like offensive impact player. Clearly, Lauri Markkanen is a better offensive impact player than Julius Randle. Now, if you put them in the wrong roles, then things are going to change. But overall, obviously the data supports this. I think Lowry is head and shoulders a better offensive impact player than Julius Randle overall.
But even, I don't want to say ignoring roles, but even if you put them close to their ideal roles so that they're maximized,
yes,
don't
exactly.
you agree? Don't you agree that a team with Lowry and a co-star who can help maximize like his skill set or put him in the ideal role, don't you think that is more likely to return 100% of its value than a team with a guy like Randall who
yeah
okay,
for sure.
So what you like most about Markkanen is like the additive nature of his impact. It's just always
correct.
Going to be there.
Correct. Cool. Yes. Yeah. And some of my favorite players in the NBA are those guys. A Desmond Bane, right? We've seen it with Desmond Bane. Like you put him in this wrong role for him, and it's like, oh, like he's not that good. It's like, well, I'm not saying he's good at being John Morant. Like I'm not saying he's the best at this, and so he can do a John Morant impersonation. I'm not saying Lauri Markkanen is the best at this, so he can do a Julius Randle impersonation. Like those are different things. And to me, role contingency is critical to all evaluations. I was just saying that I agree with what you were saying as far as like being bigger than the sum of their parts, Markkanen being a better piece for that. Yes, and I also think he's in a vacuum a better player than Julius Randle overall. So that I was just agreeing to that and disagreeing with the other part that Randle would be a 92 and Lowry would be like a 90 or whatever.
Yeah, I guess I was just saying I was making those the ratings to kind of emphasize the point that even if in a vacuum, in an individual vacuum as the star on a team, you view Randall as slightly higher because you value self-creation, it's still possible that Markkanen would be quote unquote more valuable because when you put them on team builds where there's another star, Markkanen's more likely to confer or
correct
return close to 100% of his value than Randall is. Like once you know, correct. And we're past talking about the Knicks, but I do think it actually is quite amazing how Brunson and Randall have figured out a way to we talked about synergy earlier. They have basically no synergy. They don't play together on the court at all, aside from when one of them is in trouble, they kick it out to the other. And, okay, now it's your turn. But they run no two-man action. There's no pick and roll dancing at all between the two of them. It's basically just a your turn, my turn thing, and they found a way to both be incredibly effective players.
Yeah. Well, I think
do you wonder if there's a ceiling to that?
I think that's why trading RJ Barrett has been such a boon for them, because they were doing that, and then they also had to fit this other player in somehow that needed some of that. And it's like, there's no room for this. We can't also accommodate you. Like we can barely accommodate the two of us, right? Like, so I think that there's enough usage to go around to do a your turn, my turn dynamic with two players. But once you have three, it's way too much. So I think that's why that's such a huge additive change for them kind of trading RJ Barrett and bringing in somebody who requires much less of that, an OG and an Obi. And I think that's why we've seen some success from the Knicks after losing Randall, although they played, teams who aren't very good. We've still seen success from them because I don't think, Randall is additive enough that he really substantially changes what their ceiling is when you have a guy like Jalen Brunson.
Yeah. And, speaking of ceiling, I think Steph Curry is the ultimate ceiling player. Like, I think, as we've seen, if there's one player almost in NBA history who can impact your ceiling without mitigating or diminishing the impact of another player on your team, it is Steph Curry. And I think that's basically why we ultimately made this decision. And I guess I just want to start by saying, because it really did come down to Curry versus Edwards, and I don't want to, separate myself from XJ because this is a decision we ultimately made together. But I do think it's fair to say, and I hope you don't mind me saying it, I was a bit more sympathetic to the idea that, okay, Edwards and Curry are very close in terms of impact, or at least sort of close in terms of impact. One is the best player on the best team in the West. One is the best player on a team that wouldn't even be in the play-in right now. Maybe that should just be the decision, and that's probably the decision that coaches are going to ultimately – well, I'd imagine both Steph and Edwards get in actually on the actual All-Star team. But I am very sympathetic to that. So I think your opinion is actually more important here, because while I do understand why Steph is just a better and more valuable player, in a vacuum, just because everything we've always talked about across these last 15 weeks or whatever, the additive nature of his impact, just how valuable his gravity is. I do think if you're isolating it just for these first 40 some odd games, it's a bit more nuanced. And so I think, I'd love to hear you break down why you think, even across a season like this, even when the Timberwolves have been so good and the Warriors have been so wildly mediocre, why you think that Steph's impact has been greater than Edwards.
Yeah, so I'm going to be extreme on this one, and I feel like I've been oddly extreme across the all-star choice conversations, which is kind of funny. But I don't weigh team success at all in this discussion. It's not even the only way I would weigh it is if teams were or if two players were almost exactly the same and it was a tiebreaker. But in terms of trying to figure out who should make the all-star team success is essentially irrelevant to me. And this is because when you make this team success argument, you are essentially punishing a player for having worse teammates for which he has no control over, right? It doesn't matter what the team success is, because the team success is not, it only matters insofar as the player is responsible for the team success. If Anthony Edwards, let's say, was on the Warriors, I think there's no chance they'd even be as good as they have been with Draymond in and out, with excuse me, Andrew Wiggins, who's been, and I've said this to you over text, I think has been the most damaging individual player in the entire NBA with regard to the number of games he's played, the number of minutes he's played, and how bad he's been. I think there's no player in the NBA who's been as damaging as Andrew Wiggins. And Steph Curry has to play with Andrew Wiggins, and there could be a whole host of reasons for it. I'm not going to speculate, and this is not who Wiggins has been over the course of his career. Even at his worst points in Minnesota, he hasn't been like this, besides maybe his rookie season. But I just think that you're essentially saying, sorry, Steph, you're playing with Wiggins and this crew that's been awful, and this awful version of Kevon Looney and Draymond being in and out and all of these situations and an injured Chris Paul and sorry, that's your situation. So you're not an all-star. If we're making all-star about team success, then to me, we would have a entirely different all-star team then, and that would just be a different. It would just be a different team, right? It would be about actually Mensa, who I do a pod with at Knicks Film School and on Casual Friday at Knicks Film School. Mensa thinks that the All-Star team should be based on team success because he thinks the All-Star game should be a vehicle to incentivize winning. And if this was a vehicle to incentivize winning, then I would say, yeah, for sure, you can do it that way. But if we're talking about who's individually been, the best or most impactful or most valuable players in the league, and that's who we're going to put in, team success is just not a relevant factor to that, because we have to imagine the players, if swapped in terms of their situations, what those outcomes would be. So that's why it's not really a relevant factor to me.
And we talked about this. Like if you flip, you talked about it the other way. If you flip Curry and Edwards and put Curry on Minnesota, like that's a championship favorite.
The title favorite, yeah.
Just a perfect, like not perfect, but I mean, with Towns' shooting and McDaniel's defense, and Conley is like a worse, like Conley can do a little bit with the ball in his hands, but he's best used when he can just shoot and defend, and Curry would allow him to do that. But then if Curry wanted to play off ball, Conley can run the offense. And that's doesn't even mention Nickeil Alexander-Walker, whose defense has been incredible, shooting 37% from three, which is fine. So yeah, this is a tough one for me because these impact metrics are, as we acknowledge all the time, are imperfect, and they are the best we have at fully trying to capture and gather true impact across, any subset of games, but they are also fluctuating from game to game. And it's not impossible to me that they're just not fully capturing something that Edwards is doing that's helping the team ascend to where they are. And it's maybe overrating things or underrating things that Curry's not doing that have held them back. I'm not saying that that's true. I'm just saying that, I don't know, maybe I'm starting from the conclusion and that's my flaw. Maybe I'm just starting from, well, Edwards' team is the 1 seed and Curry's team is the 11 seed. And I'm looking for reasons to confirm why we should weigh that heavier. It can't properly capture it, but it just feels gross to me, I guess, because they are close enough where I just feel like, yeah, Edwards should just get even if it's, 100 to a 92 or something. It just feels like the T-Wolves having 0 all-stars. It's just like, I mean, credit to Chris Finch, credit to the depth of that team, but there's just something feels off about that. And it wouldn't surprise me if people are like, what are you guys, fucking stupid? And that doesn't make us wrong. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I totally hear that. This is an argument I feel really confident in. I'd be happy to, for people to drop comments, disagreeing and weighing in on what, why they think, the team success is very relevant to choosing all-stars. And I'd be open to hearing that feedback. For me, it's just like, you have to be able to independently extract like what you think this player is contributing in a vacuum. And we can't do that, right? Like that's a goal that we can have. It can be aspirational, but we'll never be successful at it. So we have to do the best we can at both imagining it, using the data that we have. But that's like my goal. That's my end goal. So like if someone's end goal is to, again, like I said, for Mensa, reward teams or reward winning or incentivize winning, that's a different end goal. And I don't have that one. So that's where I start from. And I would also say, I think if a team is successful, it makes sense to look at like, wait, who are their best players and what are those players doing to like cause or be responsible for the success? I think that's a natural inclination to have. It makes a lot of sense. I just don't think that because it's intuitive that it's necessarily correct, because I think that there is a lot more to having, if I look at the Wolves, having Conley play at a level where, I wasn't strongly considering him for an all-star reserve, but it's not crazy to consider him as an all-star, right? It's also not crazy to consider Rudy Gobert as an all-star. It's also not crazy to consider Karl Anthony Towns as an all-star, right? So we have 4 guys essentially that are like sub-ish all-stars, with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's had one of the best defensive impact seasons in the league right now. If you have guys at this like consistent high level, then it makes sense that they would be so good without having a guy who is at the level of a Steph Curry. And I think it's close between Curry and Edwards, but I think it's clearly Curry to me right now. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. And, we talk about it. Defensive impact metrics are a lot shakier than offensive impact metrics. So if, overall EPM, for example, has the two players is close, but one player is gathering more of his value from defense and then offense, it's probably fair to weigh the offense heavy player a little bit higher, just because those metrics are closer to shore or closer to accurate, I guess. Is that fair to say?
Closer to, you can be more confident in them is how I would phrase it, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that we should, in spite of him not making our team, I do think that Edwards and, another guy who didn't make our team, Chet Holmgren, deserve flowers of some sort. However good you think his teammates are, Edwards has been the best player on the team that, is sitting at the top of the West right now. And we talked about them. This is another team that you talked about, you think can just be in the championship picture right now. That when we talked about the Timberwolves a month ago, again, I was a little bit skeptical, and you were like, I don't know. I think they just have enough. And I think you've come down a little bit after, watching them more. And yeah, I think the concern that you expressed to me is, okay, I'm just not sure how this team's going to score enough in the big moments, which is a reasonable concern. But, they're 47 games in, they're half a game up on Denver. They're 2 full games up on the Clippers, who you just said a few minutes ago are your championship favorite, who have had lots of health luck. George and Harden, Kawhi have pretty much all played the full season. So it is impressive what the Timberwolves are doing. And you look at Edwards specifically, I mean, he's improved at the rim. He's improved from the mid-range, small improvement, and he's still not great. He's improved as a three-point shooter. He's doing all these things. He's self-creating a ton of their offense. He is the driving factor in their offense. And this says nothing of the fact that he, once again, is near the top of the league in defensive EPM. So at 22 years old, Edwards is an amazing player. And maybe he's not that anyone really cares, but maybe he's not a hot hand theory all-star this year, but it wouldn't surprise me if, down the line, he's very easily in year after year.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I'm glad you capped it by, giving those guys their flowers, because, obviously whenever you do all-star teams, a lot of guys are deserving, and it's just a zero-sum game because you have to eliminate some and some have to get in. So, and I'm glad we did the hard work of deciding who we were eliminating and who we were having get in, because a lot of these conversations are like, this guy should be an all-star. How is he not an all-star? It's like, well, who should not be an all-star then? And we've made those determinations. So we have our hot hand theory all-star team for both the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. For the West, again, just to recap, our starters are SGA, Luka, Jokic, LeBron, Kawhi. Our reserves are James Harden, Booker, Durant, AD, Paul George, Lowry Markkanen, and Steph Curry. This is a great conversation. I'm glad we did it. Our first ever Hot Hand Theory All-Star team is in the books, and looking forward to the next one. Hope you all enjoyed it. Please subscribe, leave a like for us. We really appreciate it. And especially, more than anything, drop a comment with your thoughts. And, we respond to every single comment that goes in YouTube. Like, literally, go look at our history. We've responded to every single comment. So please drop a comment and we'll engage, and we'll love to hear your thoughts. So thank you so much.